Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, a podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, we feature professional Scrum trainers and other Scrum practitioners sharing their stories and experiences to help learn from the experience of others. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast. I'm your host, Dave West, CEO here at Scrum.org. Today's podcast, we're going to talk about agility in the Middle East. We often talk about how agility changes depending on the local environment. Well, Middle East is a growing, exciting environment, and I'm really excited to talk about it. And I'm curious, what does agility mean in the Middle East? I know there's a lot of digital transformations happening. I know there's a lot of innovation happening in the Middle East. So I'm very lucky to have today Rahman. He's joined me today, a PST who lives in the Middle East, but is originally from the United Kingdom, where he spent many years helping large organizations adopt Scrum and Agile. His special skill in this area is really helping troubled organizations adopt Agile practices really to save themselves, which is really interesting. So welcome to the podcast, Jay.
Thanks very much, Dave. Great to be here. I'm joining you from Dubai. So over there, it's the morning, and over here, it's the evening. So
I know
it's going to be a fun time.
Great. It is, and you've already done today, which is awfully exciting. And I'm just about to start it. But okay, so let's start with. I don't know much about the Middle East. I'll be honest. I've been to Dubai. I've been to some other parts in the Middle East, Jordan, etc. But I've never really done lots of business there. So is Agile right for the Middle East? Tell me a little bit about agility in the Middle East.
It's a great question, Dave. Thanks for that. I think the thing is that the Middle East has been on this upward trajectory for a while now. I think the appetite here is to really kind of place itself as the center for global trade, innovation, and most importantly, competitiveness. So what we're seeing here in terms of trends is that if there is something that is trending well, so for example, you're seeing electric cars, you're seeing the idea of hydrogen cars, you're seeing the idea of flying taxis, you're seeing the idea of AI sort of taking over the space in the region. Those sorts of things are moving here at pace. So innovation really is in the blood of the Middle East, and it's one of those things that I think is going to continue. And because of that reason, business benefits, the ability to deliver at pace, the ability to come up with great product ideas which have traction and are tested is super important. And most importantly, underpinning all of that is strong, solid strategic leadership. So I think in this region, with the pace that things are moving at, agility is even more important than ever before.
So it's interesting you say that the relationship between agility and innovation is something we perhaps don't talk about enough. We talk about, bringing Agile into a bank or a large, manufacturer, and it's really trying to improve what they've been doing. But isn't Agile? It was actually developed really to build things that were never built before. If you look at Patient Keeper, which is 35 years ago, when they started working on that product and delivered it, and they delivered it because of Scrum when they were having some challenges doing it in a different way. Really at the heart of that was the ability to deliver small increments of value, test the value that was being delivered, and then improve both the product, the thing they were delivering, and how they were delivering it. That's at the heart of Scrum. So will it be the same Agile that we see in like Western Europe? And you're right that Agile's been adopted a lot in America and Western Europe in particular, and that adoption is slowing down primarily because everybody's doing it. There's less and less new Agile happening there. But in the Middle East, it's a little bit new. So is it going to be different?
So I think the thing is that what we're seeing here is that Agile traditionally, certainly in the West, potentially has been seen as maybe a delivery mechanism only. But I think what we need to do, and what we've been talking about with Scrum.org and with all the clients that we work with, the turnarounds that we do, and the firms that are trying to get into this kind of product space, is to widen the lens a little bit. So it's not just about delivering cool stuff. It's also about thinking about cool stuff and making sure that if we're thinking, you and I have talked a lot about product thinking. One of the key elements of that is being able to test ideas rapidly. So it's not just about coming up with great ideas. This place has, a million ideas a minute, right? So it's not just about having the idea. It's about testing and validating the idea. And you need to be able to do that quickly, because if you don't, somebody else will. So a lot of the time, I mean, for example, we've got India, just over the pond, right, over the river, so to speak, and there's 1.4 million people there, and those people are innovating at pace, coming up with great ideas, and here is definitely the space to do that. The thing is that what agility gives us is that ability to, if you've got an idea, great, so does everybody else, but how do you validate it so that it's not just about taking random bets, but it's really about placing your people, your resources behind ideas that really do hold water, are validated, and are market tested. And that doesn't mean going out there spending millions and millions. It's about bootstrapping ideas, testing them in a low cost way, okay, and doing it quickly, and so that you've got confidence in the idea, and then you can then scale it from there. And so Agile gives us the opportunity to do that well, the product thinking piece that you and I have been talking about, hopefully connected to good leadership strategy. And we've talked about Agile leadership many, many times. And then underpinned by a delivery methodology or a delivery approach that makes sense for the firm and makes sense for the environment that firm is operating in. So I think, yeah, go on.
I was going to say, so do you think that ultimately, Jay, that we can get it right in the Middle East? Because there's less legacy. I mean, yes, there's lots of large organizations that have been around for, 50, 100 years. But particularly in the innovation and digital space, there's a lot of new companies or parts of existing companies that have been separately created, almost innovation incubators, as it were. Do you think that these Middle Eastern companies are going to have the opportunity really to get it right from day one? Or is that the opportunity ultimately?
I think that's a great question. I think one of the things that I'm seeing here is the openness to get it wrong. And that sounds interesting, right? But the point is that we are all about testing products and testing ideas. And so what I'm seeing here is that firms traditionally who have used Agile have only have limited it to the delivery element that we talked about. Just like in the West, they're only thinking about, hey, how do I get stuff out really, really quickly? How do I make sure that it hits the market really, really fast? But now firms are much more open to, hey, how do I get the right idea out? And are much more open to the fact that when they try something, they might be wrong initially. So they might have an idea. We talk about Slack being initially a game and now it's something completely different, right? They had to pivot. So, what was the data that led to that pivot? So firms are much more aware of this kind of idea that, we may have ideas, we may have, groundbreaking, world-changing ideas, but the market isn't ready for that yet. Or actually, funnily enough, there is no market for that yet. So we need to be able to link our product thinking and be open to not making mistakes, but certainly proving out our ideas. And so that concept of being able to prove out your ideas here in the Middle East, I think, is people are much more open to that, and they're much more aware of the fact that actually we can get it wrong initially, and that's okay as long as we don't use up all of our powder. We've got other opportunities to iterate, find new ways forward, and then deliver those ideas to market. And then if the market accepts them, then we can scale them rapidly. And I think the other thing to be aware of is that agility isn't just about coming up with great product ideas and testing product ideas and delivering them to market. There's the other element as well. There's the internal facing piece too, where agile principles enable us to then, as we scale our company, adapt to the growing pains and modify our internal organizational structure such that we can be continually able to deliver value to the market. The startup approach, all hands to the pump, the CEO answering the phones, the CEO, packaging orders and all that kind of stuff. That kind of company is great for a startup. But when you're scaling up and you've got people coming in, now you need to think about, well, how do I leverage my leadership? How do I leverage and empower people? What do I need to do as a leader? What do I need to do as a manager to be able to help my people do the best they can under the changing market conditions? So agility helps us to help then move into that scale up phase. And then when we're a mature company, well, we all know that products will change, right? So the things that got us here are not going to take us to the next 100 years. So then how do we then build out our product operating team, our product thinking team that is consistently in touch with the market to help us pivot when things change, right? So Agile helps us grow from a small startup all the way to a scale up, all the way to a mature company, and then keeps us open to that whole startup mentality once more. And I think that thinking, that kind of 360 thinking, that constant evolution of thinking is the piece that makes Agile an essential skill for operating in the Middle East, especially with so much competition here.
So it's interesting you talked about the fact that the Middle East is primed, ready for change, but just geography wise, they're in they're in the perfect place for seeing two of the largest growing markets in the world, Africa and India. And then obviously you've got the established market of Europe. They're literally in the middle of that. So it would be incredibly hard to build products and just in a traditional way. You kind of have to build them with a mindset of change, because how the products are going to work in those different environments is going to be very, very dynamic. Also, you've got different opportunities at different points in time. When Europe's down, maybe India's up, maybe Africa's up, maybe Africa's down, or India. You've got a great opportunity to be there. So it's not a real surprise that the Middle East has to be more agile, has to be more dynamic, has to be more innovative. Is that why, Jay?
Yeah, I think that's a great observation, Dave. I think ultimately agile skills are in essence essential skills for firms to be able to thrive and to continue to thrive. We touched on how those skills are going to help you build out a startup which is operating in a particular way, that the DNA of that organization will need to change when it's a scale up, and then it's going to need to change again when it turns into something which is a bit more mature. But that DNA has to be both outward facing, so being aware of the marketplace and being able to continue to serve customers well, as well as inwardly facing, and so that you can adapt and change your internal organizational structure. So agile skills are essential skills that help us to be able to internally evolve as well as externally continue to deliver value to the marketplace. And I think that relevant skill set, those soft skills are really the hard skills that companies need to be able to adopt. And I think the mindset here in the Middle East is very much about customer obsession. It's very much about employee obsession as well. How do we make and build businesses that everybody would love to work for and work in, right? So there is that kind of both outward and inward facing mindset. But that mindset has to be coupled with a really strong skill set, that agile skill set, which is much more about delivering stuff. It's about solid leadership, about empowering people, about making sure your people are doing the right things. It's about building great products that actually serve the marketplace well. It's about being able to pivot when the product doesn't work well, or if the product is sunsetting, then what do we do next? How do we move? How do we move forward? Those skills, those essential skills, are really is what's going to keep companies growing and staying out for the next 100, 200 years, right? Those companies.
Can I just lean in a little bit, Jay, on that point that you raised about this you have a startup, you work in a very different way, you then scale up, you then mature, that's the classic model. But actually the model that you're describing is ultimately building amazing organizations that are flexible, fluid, that are very much focused on the customer obsessed, but not but also product obsessed, delivering products to the customers that are both right for the business, economically, culturally, whatever, and then customer success. So it's building those skills into your organization, making them fundamentally, so you don't have the challenge. Because I've seen many organizations with amazing products, when they hit scale up, just fall apart. I've seen amazing organizations that scale and then fall apart, when they try to become mature. Ultimately they end up getting bought, usually because the product's great, but the ability to deliver it, the operational excellence has disappeared, and the like. So I've seen, and that's because that DNA isn't fundamental. They think of it purely in the context of the work they're doing, instead of thinking in the context of the organization, who they are. This is who we are. Change is inevitable. We build for it. We learn. It's never a failure if we learn something. Those sort of cultural elements. Is that really something that is growing within the Middle East environment?
I think that those firms that are sort of in that space where they're customer obsessed, so we're seeing brand new banks turning up here. Those sorts of firms really understand that. That's not to say that they've mastered the skill set. A lot of times when you're a founder in a startup and you've launched and you've got some Series A, Series B, Series C funding, you're like, oh, phew, you breathe a sigh of relief. And then what tends to happen is that you get caught up in that kind of founder's bottleneck, where those things that serves you well, you think, well, that's going to continue to serve me well, and you just continue to do those things harder and harder and harder, right? But what we need to be doing is being sensitive to the data that's coming back. The one thing that I've always talked about is that sort of empiricism, that evidence-based learning. So knowing that what you're doing is what's got you here is not going to get you there. Being open to that idea and just being aware of the sort of the metrics, the data that's going to guide you onto the next stage. I mean, those are the real key elements, right? That help you figure out that actually change is happening right now or is going to be happening. That you're getting those soft signals that are coming your way that give you that openness to pivot, right? A lot of the times, what tends to happen is that people will accept the notion that change is constant. I don't know anyone that is in business that doesn't accept that notion. What tends to happen is that they're not aware of the triggers, they're not aware of the data that tells them that, you know what, change is happening right now and we need to adapt to it, or we need to either pay attention to this or start thinking about, okay, the firm is evolving or the market's evolving and we need to now do something about it. Okay. Agile thinking, we talk about Scrum, the retrospective is one of those events which is absolutely sacrosanct. But retrospectives should not just be at team level. We talk about mission. Is your mission still valid? So at the very top of the pyramid, is your mission still valid? Are you doing the right things? Is the marketplace giving you the data that you need to know that you're on track? Then we talk about management. Is your business executing well? Are you doing all of the right things in terms of execution? So yesterday, yes, you were a startup. Today, you're a scale up. So those management structures that you were using then, are they still applicable now? Are you learning from that? Right? And especially that's even more valid when you go to like a maturity space. And then we've got the mechanics. The mechanics are about, are we doing basic things like doing Scrum really, really well? And doing Scrum well is, as you know, really, really tough. I've lost count of the number of firms that we've gone in that we've actually helped get that mechanics right. But it's not just about mechanics. Are your mechanics sort of suited to the environment that you find yourself in? A firm, for example, with high regulatory sort of obligations is going to act very differently to a firm that doesn't have those. They're FMCG, for example, fast-moving consumer goods that don't have those sort of criteria, right? A pharmaceutical firm has a different context to a finance firm, as an example. So it's all about aligning that mission, the management, the mechanics, all the way through, and having the right data that guides you when your environment changes in each of those sort of spheres of operation.
Yeah. So having the ability to effectively, frequently retrospect, we would call it, but it doesn't really matter what you call it, but to look at those things, the mission, the outcomes, the customer, the market, the operational side, the quality, the customer sat, employee sat, and continuously do it. Many organizations do it so infrequently. I mean, ultimately, in the environment that the Middle East is in at the moment, with the opportunity that's ahead, if your organization isn't doing that on at least quarterly basis, to some extent, I mean, it doesn't have to spend days doing it, but if they're not doing it on a quarterly basis, they're probably not taking advantage of the opportunity that's going to be availing itself.
Exactly. And I think sometimes in those sorts of, we work with firms who we introduce this idea of quarterly retrospective. And what we tend to find is that quarterly retrospective, that thinking does one of two things. Either the metrics are right and they're all moving in the right direction, which is great. Happy days. Let's do more of that stuff which we know is working. Okay. Or the metrics start to give us that weak signal over noise that actually, do you know what? Something's not going in the right direction. I was speaking to one firm that had a major competitor, and their whole mission objective every single year was to beat that competitor. And one year they did it. So happy days. Everyone was absolutely ecstatic. When I was speaking to the CEO, I said, well, how come you weren't ecstatic? And he said, you know what? I wanted to know why we beat them. And what I learned was actually the market had changed. So we beat them because the market had changed and they were still in that old market, and so were we. But in essence, really, it wasn't that we'd beaten them because of anything superior. The market had changed, and what we were really seeing was that there was a need to pivot. And so when I saw the numbers, I had a cold shiver go down my spine and brought my management team together and said, listen, guys, it's not that we're great. It's because the environment has changed. That's why we beat the competition. But if we don't start thinking about what's coming down the road, we're gonna go the way of the dinosaur, just like they did, right? So that kind of openness to being aware of the numbers, the metrics, the things that's happening outside, is absolutely is a critical skill. That's the thing that helps your firm go from a 10-year-old amazing startup and scale up and everything's fantastic to a 100-year-old, 200-year-old firm that's really kind of doing amazing stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because there's an element in business that's always called, which is about luck, right? You're in the right place at the right time. But the reason why you're in the right place at the right time, yes, it's lucky, but it's also because you're in the right place. You're doing stuff, you're paying attention, it's the right place. And I think that there's an operational element to that, which is about, we call it evidence-based management, making sure that you understand the market effectively, but also understand your operational capability as well, and being, continuously focused on those elements, which is interesting. All right, so we could talk for days about the Middle East.
You have to be systematic.
Oh yeah, well, yeah. I think that's the trick to manage. I mean, it's hard. The balance that you need, the discipline, particularly if you're doing really well. You can only, if you visit Dubai, you see how fantastic everything is. You go into a hotel and it's just like everything's new and amazing, and there's loads of people there, and there's people on the beach, and the restaurants are buzzing, and there's energy, and it's great. But so it'd be really easy not to pay that much attention because you don't need to, right? You're doing really, really well. The discipline that's required in times that are good and bad. It's actually much easier to be disciplined when things are going badly. It's much harder when things are going well. And putting that discipline into your organization, managing the balance necessary to be outward looking, to be inward looking, the making choices, being very mindful of the choices that you make is crucial to long-term success. But it's really hard to do, and I'm hoping that the Middle East they get it right, and you pick up this opportunity that's ahead.
I will say though that because there's so many startups, because there's so many firms coming here, there's all kinds of firms coming over from Europe, from the States. I think the one thing that I'm seeing here is that the customer here is far more discerning, because everyone is operating at pace, and everyone is trying to offer more value than you can shake a stick at, right? So basically, the standards for customers now is, I wouldn't say it's excessive, but it's certainly high. So now your ability to be hyper-focused, I mean, I don't know any firm that says, hey, we're not customer obsessed, we're not customer focused. I don't know anyone that says that. Everyone says they're customer obsessed. Everyone says they're customer focused. But the firms that really are, they're the ones that are really paying attention to their customers, and they have the right metrics, they have the right evidence in place to be able to discern what the new trend is, right? And so that they get on that early, or they test early. And that's actually really hard. And we talk about product thinking, but that's actually really hard to do.
And I think the point that you raise is they're not customer obsessed, they're product obsessed. That's not the same thing. Yes, there's elements that are the same. There's a massive overlap. But the reason building listening to your customer continuously, you end up with products that have massive amounts of features. You end up products that are incredibly expensive. You end up with products that that do more things, than actually they need to do. But being obsessed with building a product and managing the trade-offs between, do we add that feature for that one customer, or do we reduce the price for all of our customers by not, do we make it simpler? Do we create a new SKU that's less feature rich to serve a particular market? What's the most economic way? How do we manage technical debt? I'm a huge Sonos fan, right? There are speakers in the US. There's speakers that you put in your house that are Wi-Fi speakers that run in the cloud. They were customer obsessed, but what ultimately that led to was massive amount of technical debt, which now means I've got two speakers that I can't connect anymore. But I have no idea why, and it drives me mad. One of them drives me mad because I can't reach it to reset it, and I'm going to have to get a step ladder. But I think managing that, being product obsessed, in my opinion, is a lot more important than being customer obsessed.
I agree, and I think one of the things that one of the notions that we bust here a lot is actually that creating great product thinkers is not magic. That there's definitely an art to product thinking. I would absolutely agree to that. But there's also a massive amount of science to it. So, as an example, we were working with an insurance firm that didn't have great product thinking. So, what was actually happening was massive firm, wonderful people, and actually they were losing market share. Even though their products were great, they were losing market share. And their customers would rather work with an intermediate retailer than go to these guys directly, because the way to purchase from them was so difficult, right? And they had I think 30 different avenues to purchase products from them. Something ridiculous. So, and something which was just far too confusing for customers to be able to think about, how do I actually buy something from you? So they were going to intermediaries to buy this firm's products. What we did was we worked with their product team and helped them build out a professional product team. People who were really thinking about not just what the customer wanted. So they did all the stuff like focus groups and all that kind of stuff, but they used overlapping techniques like jobs to be done and market testing and all this kind of stuff. And really thought about, when we release a product to market or release a feature to the marketplace, actually looking at the numbers and actually validating whether that feature was moving the needle, and using things like statistical significance, right? If you're testing against 300 people and only 2 people respond positively, well, that's not really statistical significance. Even if 20 people respond, that, hey, this is positive, that gives you a signal. But is that something that you can bet the farm on? Probably not. So actually helping that firm to think about and building professional product owners and professional product thinking that was robust, rigorous, based on good metrics, and knowing what those good metrics were, actually helped that firm change the direction of their product suite. And they then did some amazing stuff. They built up their own fintech ideas. They kind of launched another a sort of sub company, a startup that was backed by the larger firm. They're really kind of digitally orientated. They simplified their product suite. They made it easier to buy from them. All these good things came from good thinking, engaging with the customer, thinking about what really works, testing the features that they were releasing, not giving them more and more variety, and actually simplifying the menu, so to speak, and all that data driven. And that's not.
But delivery, Jay.
Delivery.
Product thinking doesn't happen in a separate product team that's disconnected from actually the delivery elements of your organization. It's not just somebody putting together a rapid prototype, running some focus groups on that prototype, it is actually building real product that tests ideas in the most economic way and delivering those in an effective way, because ultimately getting that system working is exactly what you need to do, both when it's an initial product to when it's a scaled product. And a lot of organizations are quite good at building their first product because they do it in isolation. They work with a small sample size of customers, and they deliver a product that those small customers group love. Then they go to scale up and it falls apart horribly. Delivery needs to be entwined with product thinking.
100% agree. I think one of the biggest things that we've seen in a lot of the firms that we do the turnaround, the rescue stuff with, is that a lot of the times mean, the reason I mentioned all that stuff was primarily to underline the fact that product thinking is a full-time job. It's not something that you do part-time. Coming up with ideas and stuff, anyone can come up with ideas. But to your point, unless you're working with solid delivery teams that are intent on delivering value, you're going to come up with 1,000 ideas, which are great, but they will never see the light of day. I've met firms that have built good stuff, but it just sits on the shelf and it doesn't ever make it to market because I remember meeting one firm actually that they did some good stuff. They built some good things, but by the time they got it out to market, somebody else had already beaten them to the punch. And so the market, they couldn't capture market share, even though it was their idea initially, right? So being able to go from good product ideas to delivering those product ideas it's part of the same thing. And again, we talk about leadership, that strategic vision all the way through. So leadership, product thinking, and delivery are sort of it's not one or the other. It's everything. You need all of that stuff to be able to deliver well, right? And so I think one of the key things here is that also dispelling the myth that you only get one Steve Jobs and he was magical and he was like a unicorn. Only unicorns exist once in a while. They only come around. I think those sorts of notions we have to work really, really hard to dispel, that we can actually build great product owners, great product teams from the ground up. We can teach them all the essential skills that they need to do that job well and to do it regularly and to be able to do it on time, every time, at pace, right? And it's not just some funky accident that happens just to the lucky few.
Yeah, it's a team sport, and actually it's a discipline sport. You can you can build if you can build a team that works well together. Google Project Aristotle proved this. That works well together, that has all the tools necessary and the skills. They don't need that brilliance that Steve Jobs brings or Elon Musk brings or whoever. They collectively are more brilliant because of the things that you described. So we could go on for days. And we don't have days, unfortunately. Well, we do, but not today. So I guess the last thing is, there's a lot of organizations in the Middle East that, whether they're in a scale-up mode, whether they're in, maybe they're a traditional legacy organization. There's a lot of huge banks, huge petrochemical organizations, chemical companies in the Middle East, and then you've got startups as well. If you're in one of those organizations today, and I know that this is an unfair question because I've literally painted completely different worlds, but if you're in one of those organizations, where should you start? What would be your words of wisdom as we leave this podcast, Jay?
Sure. So where we usually start, we tend to go into those organizations which are struggling or haven't quite gotten the results that they're looking for. Where we normally start isn't with the teams. The teams tend to be really sort of up for this kind of stuff. They love the idea of collaborating. They love the idea of product thinking. A lot of the times, the teams are already there. We find that the best place to start is with the leadership space. Leadership underpins everything. Unless the leaders are aware of what agility, agile thinking, product thinking, leadership thinking in this space, and delivery thinking in this space, what it actually means for them, what you'll tend to find is that the change seldom lasts, that whatever the teams themselves are trying to do, it will not survive past the first layer. What you'll find management teams not being supportive, you're finding leadership teams not being supportive. So we kind of go leadership down. We go leadership, build that engagement from leadership, help them to understand that agile thinking really are essential skills. They're survival skills. They're not nice to haves, they're must haves, right? And being able to sort of upskill yourself so you really understand what that means is essential for the success and the continual success of your business. From then, you then move into the management space, helping managers understand what agile means for them. A lot of the times, what tends to happen is that management teams tend to think that, agile self-organizing teams means that we don't need managers anymore. And so what they tend to do is they tend to become that frozen middle. And then what they will do is, for various reasons, they will undo the change, right? So what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to build intelligent, agile management teams that really understand what it means to support their delivery teams, right? And the key piece of that is being able to eliminate friction. right? How do I help my teams go quicker and faster? The first thing I need to do is eliminate friction. And then finally, you get into the teams themselves. So my goal is always to be able to engage leadership, engage management, and then engage the teams. And if you're struggling in that space, that's the way to go. That's not the easiest way to go because sometimes management teams can be scary, right? So you need to think about elegant ways to be able to bring that kind of knowledge to your management teams. And if you are struggling with that, reach out. We're more than happy to help.
I'm excited to hear the journey in the Middle East, and I think it was interesting. Start at the top, create the environment necessary for change. And Agile isn't about other people working in a way; it's about the whole organization, which I think is good advice from you, Jay. Well, thank you for spending the time today. Really, really do appreciate it. And listeners, thank you for listening to today's Scrum.org community podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, share with friends, and of course, come back and listen to more. Today, we're talking about Middle East. Tomorrow, we'll probably be talking about product thinking. The day after, we'll be talking about the role of Scrum Master and delivery management. We have a variety of guests talking about everything in the area of professional Scrum, product thinking, and of course, Agile. Thank you, everybody, and Scrum on.